Canto the First. I want a hero, an uncommon want, when every year and month sends forth a new one, till after cloying the gazettes with cant, the age discovers he is not the true one. As such as these I should not care to vaunt. I'll therefore take our ancient friend Don Juan. We all have seen him in the pantomime, sent to the devil somewhat ere his time. Vernon, the butcher, Cumberland, Wolfe, Hawke, Prince Ferdinand, Granby, Burgoyne, Keppel, Howe. Evil and good have had their tithe of talk, and filled their signposts then like Wellesley now, each in their turn like Banquo's monarch stalk, followers of fame, 9 Pharaoh of that sow. France, too, had Bonaparte and Dumouriez, recorded in the Moniteur and Courrier. Barnave, Brissot, Condorcet, Mirabeau, Pétion, Cloutz, Danton, Merritt, Lafayette were French and famous people, as we know, and there were others scarce forgotten yet. Joubert, Hochet, Marceau, Lannes, Desailly, Moreau, exceedingly, with many of the military set, exceedingly remarkable at times, but not at all adapted to my rhymes. Nelson was once Britannia's god of war, and still should be so, but the tide has turned. There's no more to be said of Trafalgar, 'tis with our hero quietly inurned, because the army's grown more popular at which the naval people are concerned. Besides, the prince is all for the land service, forgetting Duncan, Nelson, Howe, and Jervis. Brave men were living before Agamemnon, and since exceeding valorous and sage. A good deal like him too, though quite the same none. But then they shone not on the poet's page, and so have been forgotten. I contemn none, but can't find any in the present age fit for my poem, that is for my new one. So as I said, I'll take my friend Don Juan. Most epic poets plunge in media res. Horace makes this the heroic turnpike road. And then your hero tells, whenever you please, what went before by way of episode, while seated after dinner at his ease beside his mistress in some soft abode, palace or garden, paradise or cavern, which serves the happy couple for a tavern. That is the usual method, but not mine. My way is to begin with the beginning. The regularity of my design forbids all wandering as the worst of sinning, and therefore I shall open with a line, although it cost me half an hour in spinning. Narrating somewhat of Don Juan's father, and also of his mother, if you'd rather. In Seville was he born, a pleasant city, famous for oranges and women. He who has not seen it will be much to pity, so says the proverb, and I quite agree. Of all the Spanish towns is none more pretty. Cadiz, perhaps, but that you soon may see. Don Juan's parents lived beside the river, a noble stream, and called the Guadalquivir. His father's name was Jose, Don, of course, a true hidalgo, free from every stain. Of Moor, Hebrew blood he traced his source, through the most Gothic gentlemen of Spain. A better cavalier ne'er mounted horse, or being mounted e'er got down again, than Jose, who begot our hero, who begot, but that's to come, well, to renew. His mother was a learned lady, famed for every branch of every science known, in every Christian language ever named, with virtues equaled by her wit alone. She made the cleverest people quite ashamed, and even the good with inward envy groaned, finding themselves so very much exceeded in their own way by all the things that she did. Her memory was a mine. She knew by heart all Calderon and greater part of Lope, so that if any actor missed his part, she could have served him for the prompter's copy. For her fanigals were an useless art, and he himself obliged to shut up shop. He could never make a memory so fine as that which adorned the brain of Dona Inez. Her favorite science was the mathematical. Her noblest virtue was her magnanimity. Her wit, she sometimes tried at wit, was Attic all. Her serious sayings darkened to sublimity. In short, in all things she was fairly what I call a prodigy. Her morning dress was dimity. her evening silk or in the summer muslin, and other stuffs with which I won't stay puzzling. She knew the Latin, that is the Lord's Prayer, and Greek, the alphabet, I'm nearly sure. She read some French romances here and there, although her mode of speaking was not pure. For native Spanish, she had no great care. At least her conversation was obscure. Her thoughts were theorems, her words a problem, as if she deemed that mystery would ennoble 'em. She liked the English and the Hebrew tongue, and said there was analogy between 'em. She proved it somehow out of sacred song, but I must leave the proofs to those who've seen 'em. But this I heard her say, and can't be wrong, and all may think which way their judgments lean 'em. 'Tis strange, the Hebrew noun which means I am, the English always used to govern damn. Some women use their tongues. She looked a lecture, each eye a sermon, and her brow a homily, an all-in-all sufficient self-director, like the lamented late Sir Samuel Romilly, the law's expounder and the state's corrector, whose suicide was almost an anomaly. One sad example more, that all is vanity. The jury brought their verdict in insanity. In short, she was a walking calculation. Miss Edgeworth's novels stepping from their covers, or Mrs. Trimmer's books on education, or Kolob's wife set out in quest of lovers, morality's prim personification, in which not envy's self a flaw discovers. To others' share let female errors fall, for she had not even one, the worst of all. Oh, she was perfect past all parallel of any modern female saint's comparison, so far above the cunning powers of hell. Her guardian angel had given up his garrison. Even her minutest motions went as well as those of the best timepiece made by Harrison. In virtues nothing earthly could surpass her, save thine incomparable oil, Macassar. Perfect she was, but as perfection is, insipid in this naughty world of ours, where our first parents never learned to kiss till they were exiled from their earlier bowers, where all was peace and innocence and bliss. I wonder how they got through the 12 hours. Don Jose, like a lineal son of Eve, went plucking various fruit without her leave. He was a mortal of the careless kind, with no great love for learning or the learned, who chose to go where he had a mind and never dreamed his lady was concerned. The world, as usual, wickedly inclined to see a kingdom or a house o'erturned, whispered he had a mistress, some said two, but for domestic quarrels, one will do. Now Dona Inez had, with all her merit, a great opinion of her own good qualities. Neglect, indeed, requires a saint to bear it, and such, indeed, she was in her moralities. But then she had a devil of a spirit, and sometimes mixed up fancies with realities, and let few opportunities escape of getting her liege lord into a scrape. This was an easy matter with a man oft in the wrong and never on his guard, and even the wisest do the best they can, have moments, hours, and days so unprepared that you might brain them with their lady's fan, and sometimes ladies hit exceeding hard, and fans turn into falchions in fair hands, and why and wherefore no one understands. 'Tis pity learned virgins ever wed with persons of no sort of education, or gentlemen who, though well born and bred, grow tired of scientific conversation. I don't choose to say much upon this head. I'm a plain man, and in a single station. But oh, ye lords of ladies intellectual, inform us truly, have they not henpecked you all? Don Jose and his lady quarreled. Why? Not any of the many could divine, though several thousand people chose to try. 'Twas surely no concern of theirs nor mine. I loathe that low vice, curiosity, but if there's anything in which I shine, 'tis in arranging all my friends' affairs, not having of my own domestic cares. And so I interfered, and with the best intentions, but their treatment was not kind. I think the foolish people were possessed, for neither of them could I ever find, although their porter afterwards confessed. But that's no matter, and the worst behind. For little Juan o'er me threw downstairs a pail of housemaid's water unawares. A little curly-headed, good-for-nothing and mischief-making monkey from his birth. His parents never agreed except in doting upon the most unquiet imp on earth. Instead of quarreling, had they been but both in their senses, they'd have sent young master forth to school, or had him soundly whipped at home to teach him manners for the time to come. Don Jose and the Dona Inez led for some time an unhappy sort of life, wishing each other not divorced but dead. They lived respectably as man and wife. Their conduct was exceedingly well bred and gave no outward signs of inward strife, until at length the smothered fire broke out and put the business past all kind of doubt. For Inez called some druggists and physicians and tried to prove her loving lord was mad. But as he had some lucid intermissions, she next decided he was only bad. Yet when they asked her for her depositions, no sort of explanation could be had, save that her duty both to man and God required this conduct, which seemed very odd. She kept a journal where his faults were noted, and opened certain trunks of books and letters, all which might, if occasion served, be quoted, and then she had all Seville for abettors. Besides her good old grandmother who doted, the hearers of her case became repeaters, then advocates, inquisitors, and judges, some for amusement, others for old grudges. And then this best and weakest woman bore with such serenity her husband's woes, just as the Spartan ladies did of yore, who saw their spouses killed and nobly chose never to say a word about them more. Calmly she heard each calumny that rose, and saw his agonies with such sublimity that all the world exclaimed, "What magnanimity!" No doubt this patience when the world is damning us is philosophic in our former friends. 'Tis also pleasant to be deemed magnanimous, the more so in obtaining our own ends. And what the lawyers call a malus animus, conduct like this by no means comprehends. Revenge in person's certainly no virtue, but then 'tis not my fault if others hurt you. And if your quarrel should rip up old stories and help them with a lie or two additional, I'm not to blame, as you well know, no more is anyone else. They were become traditional. Besides, their resurrection aids our glories, by contrast, which is what we just were wishing all. And science profits by this resurrection. Dead scandals form good subjects for dissection. Their friends had tried at reconciliation, and their relations who made matters worse. 'Twere hard to tell upon a like occasion to whom it may be best to have recourse. I can't say much for friend or yet relation. The lawyers did their utmost for divorce, but scarce a fee was paid on either side before, unluckily, Don Jose died. He died, and most unluckily, because, according to all hints I could collect from counsel learned in those kinds of laws, although their talk's obscure and circumspect, his death contrived to spoil a charming cause, 1,000 pities also with respect to public feeling, which on this occasion was manifested in a great sensation. But he died, and buried with him lay the public feeling and the lawyer's fees. His house was sold, his servants sent away. A Jew took one of his two mistresses, a priest the other, at least so they say. I asked the doctors after his disease. He died of the slow fever called the tertian. and left his widow to her own aversion. Yet Jose was an honorable man, that I must say, who knew him very well. Therefore his frailties all no further scan. Indeed, there were not many more to tell. And if his passions now and then outran discretion and were not so peaceable as Numa's, who was also named Pompilius, he had been ill brought up and was born bilious. Whatever might be his worthlessness or worth, poor fellow, he had many things to wound him. Let's own, since it can do no good on earth, it was a trying moment, that which found him, standing alone beside his desolate hearth, where all his household gods lay shivered round him. No choice was left, his feelings or his pride, save death or doctor's common, so he died. Dying intestate, Juan was sole heir to a chancery suit and messuages and lands, which with a long minority and care promised to turn out well in proper hands. Inez became sole guardian, which was fair and answered but to nature's just demands. An only son left with an only mother is brought up much more wisely than another. Sagest of women, even of widows, she resolved that Juan should be quite a paragon, and worthy of the noblest pedigree. His sire was of Castile, his dam from Aragon. Then for accomplishments of chivalry, in case our lord, the king, should go to war again, he learned the arts of riding, fencing, gunnery, and how to scale a fortress or a nunnery. But that which Dona Inez most desired, and saw into herself each day before all the learned tutors whom for him she hired, was that his breeding should be strictly moral. Much into all his studies she inquired, and so they were submitted first to her, all arts, sciences, no branch was made a mystery to Juan's eyes, excepting natural history. The languages, especially the dead, the sciences, and most of all the abstruse, the arts, at least all such as could be said to be the most remote from common use. In all these he was much and deeply read, but not a page of anything that's loose, or hence continuation of the species, was ever suffered, lest he should grow vicious. His classic studies made a little puzzle, because of filthy loves of gods and goddesses, who in the earlier ages raised a bustle, but never put on pantaloons or bodices. His reverend tutors had at times a tussle, and for their Aeneids, Iliads, and Odysseys were forced to make an odd sort of apology, for Dona Inez dreaded the mythology. Ovid's a rake, as half his verses show him. Anacreon's morals are a still worse sample. Catullus scarcely has a decent poem. I don't think Sappho's Ode a good example. Although Longinus tells us there is no hymn where the sublime soars forth on wings more ample, but Virgil's songs are pure, except that horrid one, beginning with Formosum Pastor Corydon. Lucretius' irreligion is so strong for early stomachs to prove wholesome food. I can't help thinking Juvenal was wrong, although no doubt his real intent was good, for speaking out so plainly in his song, so much indeed as to be downright rude. And then, what proper person can be partial to all those nauseous epigrams of Martial? Juan was taught from out the best edition expurgated by learned men who place judiciously from out the schoolboy's vision the grosser parts but fearful to deface. Too much their modest barred by this omission, and pitying sore his mutilated case, they only add them all in an appendix, which saves in fact the trouble of an index. For there we have them all at one fell swoop, instead of being scattered through the pages. They stand forth marshaled in a handsome troop to meet the ingenuous youth of future ages, till some less rigid editor shall stoop to call them back into their separate cages, instead of standing staring all together like garden gods, and not so decent either. The missal, too, it was the family missal, was ornamented in a sort of way, which ancient mass books often are, and this all kinds of grotesques illumined, and how they, who saw those figures on the margin kiss all, could turn their optics to the text and pray, is more than I know, but Don Juan's mother kept this herself and gave her son another. Sermons he read and lectures he endured, and homilies and lives of all the saints. To Jerome and Chrysostom inured. He did not take such studies for restraints, but how faith is acquired and then insured, so well not one of the aforesaid paints, as St. Augustine in his fine Confessions, which make the reader envy his transgressions. This, too, was a sealed book to little Juan. I can't but say that his mamma was right if such an education was the true one. She scarcely trusted him from out her sight. Her maids were old, and if she took a new one, you might be sure she was a perfect fright. She did this during even her husband's life. I recommend as much to every wife. Young Juan waxed in goodliness and grace, at 6 a charming child, and at 11 with all the promise of as fine a face as e'er to man's mature growth was given. He studied steadily and grew apace, and seemed, at least, in the right road to heaven. For half his days were passed at church, the other between his tutors, confessor, and mother. At 6, I said, he was a charming child. At 12, he was a fine but quiet boy. Although in infancy a little wild, they tamed him down amongst them to destroy his natural spirit. Not in vain they toiled, at least it seemed so, and his mother's joy was to declare how sage and still and steady her young philosopher was grown already. I had my doubts, perhaps I have them still, but what I say is neither here nor there. I knew his father well and have some skill and character, but it would not be fair from sire to son to augur good or ill. He and his wife were an ill-sorted pair. But scandal's my aversion, I protest, against all evil speaking, even in jest. For my part, I say nothing, but this I will say. My reasons are my own, that if I had an only son to put to school, as God be praised that I have none, 'tis not with Dona Inez I would shut him up to learn his catechism alone. No, I'd send him out betimes to college, for there it was I picked up my own knowledge. For there one learns. 'Tis not for me to boast, though I acquired, but I pass over that, as well as all the Greek I since have lost. I say that there's the place, but verbum sat. I think I picked up too, as well as most, knowledge of matters, but no matter what. I never married, but I think I know that sons should not be educated so. Young Juan now was 16 years of age, tall, handsome, slender, but well knit. He seemed active, though not so sprightly as a page, and everybody but his mother deemed him almost man, but she flew in a rage and bit her lips, for else she might have screamed if any said so, for to be precocious was in her eyes a thing the most atrocious. Amongst her numerous acquaintance, all selected for discretion and devotion, there was the Dona Julia, whom to call pretty were but to give a feeble notion of many charms in her as natural, as sweetness to the flower or salt to the ocean, her zone to Venus or his bow to Cupid. But this last simile is trite and stupid. The darkness of her oriental eye accorded her with Moorish origin, Her blood was not all Spanish by the by. In Spain, you know, this is a sort of sin. When proud Granada fell and forced to fly, Bobdil wept of Dona Julia's kin. Some went to Africa, some stayed in Spain. Her great-great-grandmama chose to remain. She married, I forget the pedigree, with an hidalgo who transmitted down his blood less noble than such blood should be. At such alliances his sires would frown. At such alliances his sires would frown. In that point so precise in each degree that they bred in and in, as might be shown, marrying their cousins, nay, their aunts and nieces, which always spoils the breed if it increases. This heathenish cross restored the breed again, ruined its blood, but much improved its flesh. For from a root, the ugliest in old Spain, sprung up a branch as beautiful as fresh. The sons no more were short, the daughters plain. But there's a rumor which I fain would hush. 'Tis said that Dona Julia's grandmama produced her dawn more heirs at love than law. However this might be, the race went on, improving still through every generation, until it centered in an only son, who left an only daughter. My narration may have suggested that the single one could be but Julia, whom on this occasion I shall have much to speak about, and she was married, charming, chaste, and 23. Her eye, I'm very fond of handsome eyes, was large and dark, suppressing half its fire, until she spoke, then through its soft disguise flashed an expression more of pride than ire, and love than either, and there would arise a something in them which was not desire, but would have been perhaps but for the soul which struggled through and chastened down the whole. Her glossy hair was clustered o'er a brow, bright with intelligence and fair and smooth. Her eyebrow shape was like the aerial bow, her cheek all purple with the beam of youth, mounting at times to a transparent glow, as if her veins ran lightning. She, in sooth, possessed an air and grace by no means common. Her stature tall. I hate a dumpy woman. Wedded she was some years unto a man of 50, and such husbands are in plenty. And yet, I think, instead of such a one, 'twere better to have 2 of 5 and 20, especially in countries near the sun. And now I think on't, me vien in mente, ladies even of the most uneasy virtue prefer a spouse whose age is short of 30. 'Tis a sad thing, I cannot choose but say, and all the fault of that indecent son, who cannot leave alone our helpless clay, but will keep baking, broiling, burning on, that howsoever people fast and pray, the flesh is frail, and so the soul undone. What men call gallantry and God's adultery is much more common where the climate's sultry. Happy the nations of the moral north, where all is virtue in the winter season, sends sin without a rag on, shivering forth. 'Twas snow that brought St. Anthony to reason, where juries cast up what a wife is worth, by laying whate'er sum in mulct they pleasen. The lover who must pay a handsome price, because it is a marketable vice. Alfonso was the name of Julia's lord, a man well looking for his years, and who was neither much beloved nor yet abhorred. They lived together as most people do, suffering each other's foibles by accord, and not exactly either one or two. Yet he was jealous, though he did not show it, for jealousy dislikes the world to know it. Julia was, yet I never could see why, with Dona Inez quite a favorite friend. Between their tastes there was small sympathy, for not a line had Julia ever penned. Some people whisper, but no doubt they lie, for malice still imputes some private end, that Inez had, ere Don Alfonso's marriage, forgot with him her very prudent carriage, and that still keeping up the old connection, which time had lately rendered much more chaste, she took his lady also in affection, and certainly this course was much the best. She flattered Julia with her sage protection, and complimented Don Alfonso's taste, and if she could not, who can, silence scandal, at least she left it a more slender handle. I can't tell whether Julia saw the affair with other people's eyes or if her own discoveries made, but none could be aware of this, at least no symptom ever was shown. Perhaps she did not know or did not care, indifferent from the first or callous grown. I'm really puzzled what to think or say. She kept her counsel in so close a way. Juan she saw, and as a pretty child, caressed him often, such a thing might be, quite innocently done and harmless styled, when she had 20 years and 13 he. But I am not so sure I should have smiled when he was 16, Julia 23. These few short years make wondrous alterations, particularly amongst sunburnt nations. Whatever the cause might be, they had become changed, for the dame grew distant, the youth shy, their looks cast down, their greetings almost dumb, and much embarrassment in either eye. There surely will be little doubt with some that Dona Julia knew the reason why. But as for Juan, he had no more notion than he who never saw the sea of ocean. Yet Julia's very coldness still was kind, and tremulously gentle her small hand withdrew itself from his, but left behind a little pressure, thrilling and so bland, and slight, so very slight, that to the mind 'twas but a doubt, but ne'er a magician's wand wrought change with all Armida's fairy art, like what this light touch left on Juan's heart. And if she met him, though she smiled no more, she looked a sadness sweeter than her smile, as if her heart had deeper thoughts in store, she must not own but cherished more the while, for that compression in its burning core, even innocence itself has many a while, and will not dare to trust itself with truth, and love is taught hypocrisy from youth. But passion most dissembles yet betrays, even by its darkness as the blackest sky foretells the heaviest tempest. It displays its workings through the vainly guarded eye, and in whatever aspect it arrays itself, 'tis still the same hypocrisy. Coldness or anger, even disdain or hate, are masks it often wears, and still too late. Then there were sighs, the deeper for suppression, and stolen glances, sweeter for the theft, and burning blushes, though for no transgression, tremblings when met, and restlessness when left. All these are little preludes to possession, of which young passion cannot be bereft, and merely tend to show how greatly love is, embarrassed at first starting with a novice. Poor Julia's heart was in an awkward state. She felt it going, and resolved to make the noblest efforts for herself and mate, for honors, prides, religions, virtue's sake. Her resolutions were mostly truly great, and almost might have made a Tarquin quake. She prayed the Virgin Mary for her grace, as being the best judge of a lady's case. She vowed she never would see Juan more, and next day paid a visit to his mother. and looked extremely at the opening door, which, by the Virgin's grace, let in another. Grateful she was, and yet a little sore. Again it opens, it can be no other. 'Tis surely Juan now. No, I'm afraid. That night the Virgin was no further prayed. She now determined that a virtuous woman should rather face and overcome temptation, that flight was base and dastardly, and no man should ever give her heart the least sensation. That is to say, a thought beyond the common preference that we must feel upon occasion for people who are pleasanter than others, but then they only seem so many brothers.